Hello. Thank you for coming to listen to us today. Did you know that elephants only sleep for 2 hours a day? Or that the outer shell of a crab is actually its skeleton? And that penguins can swim underwater at speeds of 22 miles an hour? We didn't know any of these facts 12 months ago before we started this project. So today we're going to talk to you about how we brought to life some characters for one of the world's largest confectionery brands in a personalized digital experience. We're going to do a bit of a case study about how we designed this, how we built it, and some of the things we learned along the way. But first, some introductions. So my name's Tim.
And I'm Dan, and we're the co-founders of MakeBuild, a design and innovation studio from London in the UK. Having spent many years at one of the world's largest digital agencies, Accenture, Tim and I formed MakeBuild a few years ago with the goal of moving quickly, using low-code technology, and spending less time discussing, talking, and presenting, and more time making and building. Here's a few examples of some of our work. Today, though, we're going to be sharing the story of Fruitella Curiosities, a project which came about a year and a half ago. We'll be talking about how we designed and built it using low-code technology and some of the lessons we learned. So, how did this project come about? Well, early last year, a good friend of ours sent me an email with an interesting question. Dan, can you help us do something cool with AR? Anybody who's worked in agencies or worked for clients knows that these kind of questions come up from time to time. Instantly, we had some questions of our own. Why did they want AR? What did they want to show? Was AR the right solution for this problem? And also, crucially, for us as a low-code studio, did we have the skills to design and build it? The more we spoke with the client, and after some back and forth, we understood that the client, Fruitella, part of the same group as Mentos and Chupa Chups, were looking to do something really exciting when they launched this range of new jelly sweets. Each pack would be related to a world, snow and sea to start with, and on the back of the pack would be a QR code. They wanted to pair this with a digital experience so that when scanning the QR code, something innovative would happen on the user's device, and they had suggested maybe this could be something to do with AR. As designers by trade, we don't like to jump to solutions right away, so we didn't want to say, yes, 100%, let's do AR, or let's go straight into the tech. We wanted to take a step back, pause, and think about the objectives of our users and our client. So, like any good designer would, we grabbed our Post-its, we grabbed our Sharpies, and we headed to the client workshop. During this workshop, we helped them and we helped us come up with 3 key objectives for the project. We wanted to entertain in a family-friendly way. We wanted to educate, teaching kids and their parents about these sweets, about the animals inside the bag, and about the worlds in which they live. And we wanted to innovate. We wanted to help Fruitella create something that pushed their brand forward and differentiated them on the shelf. During the workshop, we explored lots of different inspiration. Here are 3 examples of some of the work we looked at from Google, Toyota, and Gucci, and we also looked at some examples from WWF, just looking at what had been done with creative web experiences with a little bit of an eye on how AR could be used to help brands share their message. This was great because it helped us understand the things that they liked and the things they didn't like. Next, it was about ideating. So we spent some time with our clients thinking about how we could help them achieve those goals of entertain, educate, and innovate with some ideas that we could build. We thought about coloring and creativity. We thought about trivia, learning, and facts. And we looked at exploring in AR. Tim and I took this away. We did a lot of thinking, and we came back with a mega concept that would bring everything together. We went quite ambitious. And here it was in a very basic wireframe format. So here's how it would work. You'd scan the QR code on the back of the pack. You'd launch into an experience where you'd select a world, sea or snow to start with. and then you'd select a creature. Having selected a creature, you'd be able to play around and discover some facts, learn, that educate box ticked. Then you'd be entertained by the practice of coloring in, entertain, and then we'd help them innovate by displaying this model with your coloring wrapped around it on the device and then in your living room in augmented reality. It was an ambitious ask, but we thought it was a great concept.
Thanks. So, at this point in the project, we knew what we'd be building. We'd had promised this really ambitious digital experience, and the client was on board. So now we had to bring it to life. We had to design it and build it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the design decisions and the process we followed that took us from this to this. A rich digital experience that users are using all over the UK now. So where did we start? Well, the whole experience was based around this pack of sweets, jellies, and these have animals and characters inside them. So we knew the characters were the first touch point a user had with this experience. So it made sense that's where we started our design work. So before we went into any UI design, even proper wireframing, we went from sketch straight to modeling and trying out some 3D shapes. We're not 3D artists, but we are creatives, so we had to come up with a way to brief in some technical people to build these. So we came up with a brief for ourselves that looked at taking the jellies, which are in the packet, which are tiny little sweets, but that represent a creature, and trying to maintain that look and feel, so create a jelly-like shape, but we wanted to add a bit more detail so we could tick that education box. We wanted to talk about facts, we wanted to have tusks on the walrus so we could talk about its tusks. We needed to have that balance between detail and jelly-like shapes. So with our brief in mind, we worked with some partners and between ourselves, hacking together some 3D stuff. Some guys in Italy at an agency called Nerdo, and a guy in Mexico called Aaron Martinez. We came up with this world of jelly creatures, and at the moment there's 14 characters across 4 different worlds. So with the creatures defined, the next step was to figure out how we could bring these together into a digital experience. And we do a lot of web and marketing sites as an agency, and we tend to stick with style guides and typography and colors as our starting point. But this time we already had this world of creatures at our disposal. So we had to build upon that. So what we created was a look and feel that builds upon the jelly creatures and kind of creates a UI around that. So there's a lot of 3D buttons, hover states, there's hand-drawn typography, really bright, punchy colors, and that became the whole look and feel for the site. But beyond visuals, we actually faced a few more challenges. So building this experience, there wasn't a lot of standard patterns for things like customizing a 3D model. In fact, when we started this, we hadn't found another mobile experience where a user could easily customize their own model and view that in augmented reality. As well as customizing your model, there was browsing 3D worlds and so on. So we had to kind of hack together and figure out some of these UX patterns. So the first one I want to talk about is the customizer experience. So on a tiny little screen, we realized we had to figure out a way for users to draw and create a skin for this animal. And what we actually ended up creating was like our own version of Microsoft Paint, if you like. So we had brushes, stickers, pattern tools, all on a tiny device. And there was no existing libraries or anything we could work with here. So we had to create something bespoke. So there's bespoke icons for all the tools. And we tried out lots of UX and UI patterns and figured out what worked best. The next thing we had to figure out was how do you actually interact with these characters in augmented reality? That was actually easier than we anticipated. It turns out that to interact with a 3D model in the real world, even if it's through your phone, you don't really need an interface. But we did have some challenges around model sizing in the early days, as you can see with this rocket that's 3 times the size of my house. And finally, we had to figure out the world selector. This is a really key part of the experience because when you scan that code, you've eaten a candy, and you scan the packet, this is your first touch point. So we need to build upon that fun experience of eating sweets and keep the momentum going. So this needs to be really engaging, really entertaining. So we use lots of swipe gestures to sweep between the worlds. There's parallax movement, and it made it feel very game-like. And that game-like experience kind of fed into the rest of the app as well. So there's a lot of motion, a lot of movement throughout the experience. And it was actually our choice of low-code tools, which is kind of the second part of this talk, which allowed us to experiment with motion when such a small studio and bring to life a rich experience. So next, we'll talk about that.
Thank you, Tim. So yeah, next, having done the design bit, it was now time to think about how we were actually going to build this thing. And this is where low-code comes into play. Having taken a step back and looked at the amazing design work that Tim and the team had been working on, the more we dug into it, the more we realized that this was best brought about via a mobile web experience. And there were 3 reasons for that. Firstly, we wanted it to be easily accessible. So by scanning a QR code on the back of the packet, we could launch a user right into the web browser. We didn't want to have them downloading any apps, which meant there would be low friction. Point number 2. Point number 3 is that as a studio, we needed to deliver this on budget, and we were able to deliver a mobile web experience for much less money than a mobile app experience. Let's be clear about it. So what options are out there? Well, we looked at 3. Well, actually, we looked at many, but 3 we shortlisted. Spline, existing web AR platforms like Zappar, and also building something custom. So the first tool we played around with quite a bit was Spline. I don't know if anybody in the room is here from Spline today. I believe they've got a talk later. We'll definitely be tuning in. As many of you will know, Spline is a great tool that allows you to design and build 3D models in the browser. It's kind of that same no-code, low-code ethos that we love at MakeBuild. And we had a lot of fun experimenting and playing around with it. What we loved was that we'd be able to jump into it right away and deliver it on budget, but sadly it didn't allow us to expand the worlds and add new worlds as easily or as quickly as we wanted, and the AR functionality was limited. Next up, we looked at existing web AR platforms like Zap AR. These were great because there were just so many tried and tested examples of big brands worldwide designing and building awesome experiences with AR with Zappar. Sadly, it was way out of budget, so kind of put that one out of our reach. Lastly, we explored doing something custom. We initially assumed, as a small studio with design-heavy expertise, that creating something capable of showing an AR model, 3D, from scratch would probably be beyond our reach. But thanks to models and libraries like Model Viewer, we were able to quite simply display models in the browser, wrapped in Webflow. And we'll talk a bit about Webflow in a moment. The pros here were that we could use Webflow's CMS, which allowed us to expand the world accordingly as new packets of suites were launched, new worlds. It would allow us to do that AR functionality that we needed via Model Viewer, and it was also within budget. So let's talk a little bit about the stack without getting into the weeds. We use Webflow with the CMS, hosting, and CDN, and animations and interactions built in. This was really key because it allowed us to prototype and test and create a really rich experience that was game-like, as Tim mentioned. Atop that, we added the Model Viewer library. This was just a simple embed on the page in Webflow where we could display the 3D models and trigger AR experiences. And lastly, we sprinkled on a little bit of code. This is low code after all, not no code, where you'd allow a user to draw on a canvas, generate model textures, and have them applied to a model. So Webflow, let's start with Webflow. This allowed us to set up a solid foundation. So once Tim had finished the design work, the team got to work styling Webflow, adding in custom fonts, branding, colors, and, crucially, the animations and interactions to create a really rich experience. Next up was Model Viewer. This was really fun, doing a lot of experimentation with this library just to see how far we could push it, and thankfully we could push it quite a long way. There's a lot of customization options available within Model Viewer. Testing was really key here, and you can see my dad over there on the right being an unwilling participant of the testing with a giant walrus in the living room. AR compatibility varies a lot between iOS and Android, and even between different versions of Android, so testing is really key, as we'll talk about later. So we ran to the shops and bought a ton of AR capable, or capable as we thought, Android devices to see, did they work or did they not? And if they didn't work, how could we fix the problem or come up with a nice error message solution? Lastly was the sprinkling of custom JavaScript that we put on top. As you can see here, over on the simulator, we did some testing to see how we could create a pattern that could then be applied to a model. This was a really big moment for us, I think, during the project where we got really excited when we realized actually we could bring all of these different bits together. We had a 3D model, and this little screenshot at the bottom with the bear with "Hi Dan" written on it was hosted in Webflow at this point. We'd drawn on a canvas, and we could see it applied to this model that we could then really interact with in AR. It was an awesome moment and kind of showed the power of low code. And so how did it go? Well, here's a quick demo of it all coming together. You can see that by scanning the QR code on the back of the pack, you're launched into the experience. Here's the elephant in the new Safari world that we just launched. You can tap on some of those blue dots to reveal facts, and then you can jump into the customizer experience. You're given a nice canvas where you can draw and drag. You can add textures and stamps and draw over the top of that if you like. Let your creativity run wild. And then we also added a kind of a social sharing element where you can name your creature, hit save, and then get a nice Polaroid picture moment of your creature in its natural habitat. From here, you can save, share, or even print in case you want to put your kids' work up on the fridge. And then, of course, you can reveal it in AR, the pièce de résistance. And here it is in my living room, coming to life. The little sketch that you'd done on that canvas being wrapped around a model and displayed in your home.
Thanks. So here we are, 12 months later. We've launched the project, and lots of people are interacting with it every day. But what did we learn? Well, two things really, or three things. So the first of which is low code really does make a great foundation for these big technical projects. There's a few reasons for that. It's really scalable, so we had no idea how big this was going to go. They're selling thousands, hundreds of thousands of these packs of sweets a week, and Webflow scales effortlessly. And the second was the speed. So we built a really complex, innovative really experience with a team of 2 and a couple of experts here and there. And that would usually take teams of 10, 20 people, I think, to build something like that.
Thank you, Tim. The other lesson that we really took away from this, from the build side, was around testing. As I alluded to before, I can't stress enough that if you're building an AR web experience in particular, to test, test, test. Web AR requires extensive testing because although there is great functionality and compatibility out there, it's a bit spotty. It varies depending on platform, depending on iOS version, Android version, and depending on the device capabilities. We'd often find that some versions of iOS would work great, and some versions of Android would work great, and others wouldn't. So you'd have a feature which worked on one device and then didn't work on another. So testing, troubleshooting, and bug fixing was really key. And for those devices that don't work, a nice error message or something explaining why it's not working is really important from a UX perspective.
And the last thing we learned was lots and lots of animal facts. Every animal, and there's 14 of them, or every character has 5 or 6 facts that you can explore. So let me leave you with 3 of our favorites before we go. So starfish can live for up to 35 years, which is impressive. A walrus can hold air in its throat and sleep underwater. And buffalo herds vary in size from 50 to over 2,000. I got that right? 1,000 animals. So we learned lots of facts, we had lots of fun, and that was the project. If you want to learn some facts for yourselves, feel free to scan the code, or come and find us later in the day, and we might have some of the packs of sweets for you to have a look at. Scan the packet, and you'll be able to discover the worlds for yourself. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.